Welcome to Amra's Armchair Anecdotes. I'm Amra Pajalich, writer, teacher and storyteller. Pull up a chair and let's dive into stories about writing, life and lessons learned, sharing wisdom from my armchair to yours. You can find the episode show notes, your free episode handouts and my how-to guides at amrapajalich.com/podcast. And now it's time to dive in. Today I'm joined by Les Zig. He's an Australian novelist, editor and publishing mentor who has over a decade helping writers turn manuscripts into books. He's the author of several novels, including Just Another Week in Suburbia, August Falling, and the young adult novel Pride. His work explores the complexities of everyday life, relationships, and the quiet dramas that unfold in ordinary communities. Alongside his own writing career, Les is a key member of the team at Busy Bird Publishing, an independent Melbourne publishing house dedicated to supporting emerging writers. Through Busy Bird, he has worked as a structural editor, a mentor, a publishing guide. He's helped hundreds of authors develop their stories and navigate their publication path. But what I love most about Les, he's been on both sides of the desk as a novelist, wrestling with drafts and rejection, and as a publisher, evaluating manuscripts and helping writers. So today we're sort of going to talk about all of these lessons as a writer, editor, publisher, and what separates manuscripts that succeed, the realities of the publishing world, and what writers need to know to build a sustainable writing life. Thank you so much, Les, for coming on my podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I just thought I would start, as we all want to start, about our long road to publication and becoming a writer. So you wrote for years, you revised your manuscripts repeatedly, and you faced plenty of rejection. You published novels, but wanted to talk about, what do you think is the biggest misconception about being ready to publish, based on your experience first as a writer, and then maybe talking about it from the other side as a publisher?
As a writer, one of the things, and I think there's a rite of passage that most writers go through. As you get older and more experienced, you start to see the naivety and the arrogance of youth. Like when I was young, it was like, how good am I? Which I think most writers go through when they're young and know nothing. So there's this feeling, I think a lot of people understand, that the eagerness to try and get their work out there. But I think sometimes that comes at the cost of putting the amount of work and revision they need to into their manuscript. And they're sending stuff out that is just, it's too early a stage. And for the most part, you'll only get one shot at this. So you can't go to a publisher and say, hey, I've revised it, can I resend it to you? They're generally not going to be interested. It's a case of, you got to get it as good as you could possibly get it. And the way traditional publishing is now, with the turnaround in times from acceptance to publication, they're not really set up anymore to really invest time and energy of years in helping you develop your manuscript. They really want to find stuff that's almost there and they can take it the rest of the way.
Yeah, that's the thing. You really need to put in a lot more, work yourself. Like I remember for my debut novel, I had my editor at Text really working closely with me and putting in the time to edit and to revise and to support me. And I don't see that happening so much anymore. There has been a lot of pressure on the publishing industry in terms of, load and really needing to put all that work in beforehand.
Yeah, I have a friend who was published. I won't name the publisher. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but from the acceptance to publication, it was just 9 months. So that was just an insanely quick turnaround. You go back decades, and they might spend years with an author. And it's just obviously, it's a byproduct of where we are as a people. Things tend to get faster and quicker. You look at sports like cricket, where they've created short form versions of it, because people can't be bothered watching the 5-day version. You look at television shows. When I grew up, television shows went for 22, 26 episodes a year. Now they're like 6 to 10 episodes. Everything needs to be faster. So just sort of in terms of writing, I always suggest to writers, just be entirely sure this is the version you're going to put out into the world. I appreciate the enthusiasm and the excitement you have toward it, and that's great attitudes to have, but don't let it cost you quality. Don't think that. And I think, again, it's a thing of inexperience and naivety, where you think, my stuff's so great, they'll look past a few errors. and just be captivated by my magnificence. And it's like, they probably won't. And the thing you have to understand is these people are reading lots of manuscripts. I recall when I used to work for anthologies for Busybird, you'd spend 8 hours reading, and by, the 6th, 7th hour, you're just exhausted. And there might be like great ideas in there, but it's a case of, if you think that's all you need, don't worry about the spelling, the grammar and that sort of stuff. Trust me, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours in, you're just looking at the stuff and going, no. And the reality is, like, a lot of publishers do look at stuff like that. It's like, what are the reasons I can dismiss something really quickly? So, put your best foot forward.
And for you as a writer, because you were writing for a long time, facing that yourself in terms of rejection and, fighting for your publication journey. I mean, there's that element of being a writer, we have to be deluded and think that what we're writing is the best thing that's ever been written. That's the only way we'll get through it. But then you need to have that reality. So is that something that you also went through?
Oh, yeah, totally. And it's all part of, like, sort of an emotional, spiritual journey that I think a lot of writers have. It's like, why are you writing? And initially you attach those material things, like the publication, the success, the hopefully the praise and all that sort of stuff. And when you do that, you just set yourself up for a lot of frustration, because those things might never come. You might be published and your book just disappears quietly. And a lot of books do. That's the reality of the publishing industry. There's so many books out there. The preconception a lot of people have that once you're published, you have the journey of Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or one of these, like, best-selling authors. They're the exception. Most people sell moderately or undersell. So when you attach significance to those things you have no control over, like acceptance and praise and all that sort of stuff. And I'm telling these stories because I have a love of telling stories. And if I'm getting the gratification out of doing that, then I can never really disappoint myself, because I'm doing what I love. So the other stuff, we'd all love bestsellers and all that sort of stuff. And for anyone listening to this, I hope you do have a bestseller. But if that's where your happiness lies, there's a very good chance you may never feel happy. So you have to find happiness within yourself and attach that to the things you can control.
Yeah, that's something that I've also really learnt through my journey, where I was writing for publication and writing what I thought would sell, and being left bitter when things didn't turn out the way I expected. And now I'm at the other end of it, where I'm like writing what I really love, what I enjoy, what I think is important. And the publication is fun and joyous, and hopefully things will happen, but I'm trying not to attach my energy to that.
Yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing about books is they are forever. We still read Tolkien, Lord of the Rings was written, 67 years ago, Dickens, Jane Austen, Bronte sisters, Shakespeare. We're still reading these books that are hundreds of years old. So books do live forever, unless you attach it to something very specific and topical. Books do live forever, and in a way, like, you can pick up Jules Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth and read that, and it's this fantastical adventure about them trying to get to the centre of the Earth. Nowadays, the sciences of what we understand are like, oh, that's totally not possible. But in a book, we accept it's a snapshot into time, and we're reading something that was written in a different era and about a different period. And we can just totally immerse ourselves in that if it's done well. I totally get it. I feel it myself, that when you put something out there, you want it to rocket up the charts and all that sort of stuff. But if it doesn't mean that book's a failure. It still has life beyond immediacy, And the book I always point to is John Williams Stoner. And it sold a couple of thousand copies and then just disappeared. And in the early 2000s, a publisher picked it up to release as part of their classic novels line. And then in the 2000s, it started to get some traction, and people like Ian McEwan were endorsing it. And by 2010, 2011, it had become a bestseller. So that's like 50, 60 years after it was initially released.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we don't want to wait 50, 60 years. And John Williams had actually passed away about 16 years earlier. But it just does show that books, they can have a longevity that probably not a lot of other mediums can, or artistic mediums. So, and you can really just appreciate a story for whatever it's doing. I read it now, or 40 years, like I read Catcher in the Rye when I was in year 9, and that's like about 40 years ago, and I loved it, and I can still read it now and appreciate it at different levels too. So books are so multifaceted in what they can do.
And the other thing is also the longevity of a career. Like, you and I have been at this for a while, and we've had a lot of detours and, turns and turnabouts, but it really is just about showing up and continuing. And, I think we both feel the same way, where we have to write despite ourselves. It's an actual need for us, just like breathing is. And so it does fulfill us in a different way.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I mean, that's totally it. You know, it's something that is a need. You write because you cannot not write. And I think a lot of people sort of go into it with different attitudes, but when you strip it all back, that's what it really comes down to. You have a story you want to tell.
Yeah, and it's that need for self-expression and for connection. But honestly, like I just love the process of writing. I love the process of publication, but honestly, the writing is really where my joy is. The publication is still like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful when you're writing something, and I mean, I'm not sure sort of about your process of you plan it all out in advance or not, but like with myself, I plan certain things out, but when you're writing and you start seeing linkages, and it's like, oh, that connects to that. I didn't even see that coming, but it's working out really well. And it's this really awesome feeling of discovery. It's almost like you're a conduit for some other being telling you a story, which you're then filtering onto the page.
Yes.
But I really love that as you see it take shape, and as you see it start to work, it's just this, it's such a fulfilling feeling.
Yeah, and I still am a discovery writer, but I'm finding that I need to plot more because I'm getting on in the years. I can't spend years working on one book anymore and writing 120,000 words to find a 70,000 word story. So
Yeah.
I'm getting a little bit more honed in with
But
that
that's
side
also
of
writing.
it.
I mean, you constantly evolve. Just saying, when that's part
Yes,
of the process,
exactly.
you evolve.
And each book is different, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can't really say, I figured it out. The next book goes, nah, you haven't.
No, yeah, I mean, there's one I've been revising, which I wrote initially 11 years ago, and it's only probably in the last year I started addressing what I thought were the big plot issues 10 years ago. In between when I originally wrote it, and I've revised it multiple times to now, it took me like 8-9 years to really work it out, why it wasn't functioning to the way I wanted it to function initially. And sometimes that just comes from maturity and experience, and sometimes it just comes from distance. You know, you take some time away from something, you look at it, you get fresh perspective, and it's like, okay, I see the problems now and I can attack them from a different perspective.
I find distance really helps. I find now that I have to draft and write and then leave it for a few months and then come back to it fresh for that editing part of it, because really need that distance, kind of be able to see it a bit more clearly.
What?
So just wanted to talk about how you emphasize that writing the book is only part of the journey, and you talk about the 1% rule, so about making small consistent progress. Yep. So what do you think are some habits that actually help writers finish books?
You have to find consistency in your writing so that you're productive. And the way you can tell you're productive is if you sit down and can pick up from where you left off, as opposed to, you sit down and it's like, I don't remember what I wrote last. I've got to reread the last chapter. I don't recall where I was going. Writing really is about momentum. The more you do it, the easier you find to get back into it. And you'll find that between your writing sessions, you're actually thinking of the story. So you could be washing dishes, taking a walk, whatever the case is. And it's still ticking over in your mind. And it works equally the other way. When you're not writing, you're not really thinking about the story, and then it's really hard to get back into. And one of the things I see with a lot of inexperienced writers is they feel they need big chunks of time to write, otherwise it's not worthwhile. So like I've always said, if you just wrote 15 minutes a day, that's probably about 200 words. In a week, that's 1,400 words. In a year, that's going to be about 70,000 words. It does add up. So don't look down on any block of time, no matter how small it is. Just sort of keep your hand in there a little bit at the very least. And then just also, you have to learn to sacrifice things, Writing's this really weird, lives in this really weird space because it's a hobby until it's not. But we all write as a hobby initially and hoping we can make a living out of it. But until we're making a living, it's still a hobby, even though we're spending almost living like hours into it. So, but that just means that sometimes, because you're doing it in between work or whatever the case is, that you just need to sacrifice things. It's like, well, maybe I don't go for a coffee with friends on this day because I want to spend some time writing, or maybe I don't sit back and watch The Voice or whatever I'm going to watch because I just need to spend that time writing. One of the questions I ask is like, if you had a cold, or if you had an argument with your partner, or, you just woke up and you were tired, would you not go to work that day? And the reality is, no, of course you'd go to work. You'd put it up. And writing is the same thing. So why don't you treat writing the same way? And I mean, one of the biggest things I see in a lot of writers, including myself, is procrastination. Sometimes when you sit there and it's just like hard finding your way into the story and through the story. So it's like, yeah, I'll go read a Wikipedia article, or go watch a video on YouTube. And that leads to 4 videos I watch on YouTube, or whatever the case. So it's just compelling yourself to take your work seriously as a practice, putting aside time to do it consistently. It doesn't have to be every day if that's not your thing. My friend Blaze, she'd write every weekday, but on the weekends she'd give herself the weekends off. But it's just got to be something that when you sit down, you feel ready to just get straight back into it. And then just keep pushing forward. The other thing too with writing is I've known inexperienced writers who they ditch what they're writing because it starts to feel like hard work, or they get bored of their story, or it's frustrating them. It's like, you know what? That's what's going to happen. You're writing an 80,000 word novel. You're not going to love it every word. There are going to be days you sit there and just loathe it. There are going to be days you're thinking, why am I wasting my time? There are going to be days you think, I should just delete this. I should just be done with it. And you just have to teach yourself to just work your way through that. Like, I compare it a lot to relationships. You know, if you have a long-term relationship, there's times your partner frustrates you and annoys you or does all that sort of stuff. But if the relationship's right, you always come back to the love of it. And it's the same thing as writing. You are going to get those moments that aren't as positive, but just keep pushing through, because you'll find your way back to it if your relationship to your story is right.
I agree with so many things that you're saying, because this is a conversation that always comes up with emerging writers. Oh, I have this commitment, I have that commitment, I have all these things going on. And it's like, we all do, and you have to really sacrifice and dedicate time. When I was doing my PhD and had a 5-year-old, and I was working full-time as a teacher, I had to wake up at 5:30 in the morning in order to write. There was no ifs or buts about it. That was the time that I could do it. And so that's when I did it. And now I'm in the position where I'm working part-time. I've got one day that is like my writing day. But having said that, when I'm working on that first draft, that momentum really needs to be there. I am working on it every day, even if it's a 5-minute snatch of time, just moving it along until I get that draft down. And then I move into that revision phase, which isn't as frantic. So yeah, it really is just persistence. And you don't need a whole day. You can do so much. I mean, in 15, 20 minutes, do a sprint.
Yeah, I mean, I used to do that when I was younger, I'd write a whole day. I mean, the other thing I also do now is I generally will leave it at a high point where I know what's happening next. It's not a case of, like, you see writers sometimes, they'll just write and write and write until they're exhausted and spent. And next day they go back to it, it's like, I don't know what happens next. And so, like, for myself, I leave it sometimes, or a lot of times, it's just at a high point, because then I look forward to going back to it and continuing from that point. And that stimulates me to think about it a lot more. So it's just sort of little habits like that just keep you kicking over. You know, anything that you do, like exercise is another really good example. If you're not, a chronic exerciser, there'll be times you'll be really enthusiastic for the first couple of weeks, and then you'll start dropping off and all that. So a lot of times you have to find a way to self-motivate and just coach yourself through it, because you will have a lot of situations where you just go, I don't think I can write today, I'm tired, I'm sick, I'm distracted, whatever the case. And it's just sort of being able to talk to yourself and coach yourself through that.
I woke up this morning, went downstairs, my husband and daughter, are you okay? You look sick, you sound sick, you look terrible. I'm like, yep, I feel terrible, but I'm going to yoga. And they're like, are you sure? Maybe you should rest. No, I made a commitment to myself. I know that the person walking out of yoga will be happier than the one walking in. To get to be her.
Totally.
Yeah, that's to know that you're not going to enjoy it.
And then after you do it, I'm glad I did that.
My supervisor for my PhD, when I was whinging about my PhD and I was struggling, and she's like, well, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, but you're in the 1% of the population. And I'm like, okay, perspective. That's it. I need perspective.
It's a funny thing too, because like when I talk to interns at work, and interns are often just in their 20s, when I grew up wanting to write in the 80s, the only avenue to do that was to go out and buy a typewriter, because computers weren't the thing. Like, you had home computers, which were gaming computers, but you didn't really have work computers. So, like, my first book I wrote on a really old typewriter. And then my brother bought a PC in about 1990, around there, and they were just starting to come into, like, the home as, like everyone was having one. So in the 90s, everyone started getting a computer of some sort, and those computers had word processing software. And then in the, about the early 2000s, then you had like a lot of blogging and stuff starting to come in. So just trying to say, sort of, originally when you wanted to write, there weren't a lot of avenues to do it unless you made a commitment to find a way to do it. Nowadays, everyone does have a computer, and it's like a case of a lot of people who probably never would have considered it previously think, oh, I've got a computer, I can write something, and I can publish directly to Amazon through that. And now you're getting AI coming in, which is going to escalate that to another level, because you'll get a lot of people who just say, I'll just get AI to do it for me, or I'll get AI to connect the dots, or whatever the case. I mean, totally agree with your lecturer that I think also that there is an element now we're going to see a lot more material because of things like AI and that, just as we saw a lot more people writing when computers came in and stuff like that. It becomes a much more accessible medium. Now, the thing is, how good is something you first start writing? I know I've looked at some of my old stuff and just thought, ooh, it's really, really bad. But that's also part of the journey. It's part of the evolution.
It is so important to have that perspective and be like, anything that you do, any single skill that you do, when you're first doing it and you're not good at it, you don't feel great and you're frustrated and you feel angry, but you have to keep showing up and persisting. And the thing about, arts is that there is so much joy when you do it, that those endorphins and those feel good, and you've just got to focus on that and focus on that journey, I think, and the joy.
Well, I mean, I always give our prospective interns an analogy that if when I got a tennis lesson from Roger Federer, I'm not going to become Roger Federer, because that's years of practice and training and all that sort of stuff. So with writing too, it's when you're starting out, even to this day, I've been writing for, like I said, 40 years, you're constantly learning, and sometimes the best way of learning is by doing the wrong thing, by messing up, and by seeing why it doesn't work. You look at your stuff, there's certain phrases we all overuse. We've all got those pet words that we love. When you're writing 80, 90, 100,000 words, you're not mindful of every single word until you start seeing in revision. You're going, oh, I'm repeating that a lot. But there's a lot of things that you are really learning because of the missteps that you take, rather than doing it the right way. So it's a really beautiful but frustrating journey. And you have to accept there's going to be a lot of missteps along the way for most of us.
Yeah, and be kind to yourself in the beginning. Just to focus on actually doing it as opposed to judging yourself as you're doing it.
Yeah.
You're known for specialising in structural editing and helping writers strengthen their manuscripts. What are some common structural problems you see, and do you see writers resisting cutting scenes, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, I find the more inexperienced writers are the ones who really love their work, to the point that if you highlight something, their natural response is you don't get it, or you get this. I tell a story of a writer friend who's when he's 40, he's very, very, very accomplished mentor, won awards and stuff like that. And he's telling about going to a library workshop one day, and he handed in his work and he was petrified. And he said this 20-year-old kid walked in, he was just really cocky for doing his workshop, didn't care. And he goes, I don't get it. Why is he so cocky and I'm so much more experienced? And I'm, really petrified. And I really thought about it for some days. And then it came to me that when you do have a lot of experience, you then understand all the stuff that could possibly be wrong with what you've written. And you also understand that there's probably stuff you haven't even considered that could be wrong. It's like that saying, you know what you know. When you initially write, when you start writing, you have this almost infallible belief in what you've written as being brilliant, which I went through. Like I said, a lot of writers would go through this stuff, and they don't really have that objectivity.
Yes, we've all gone through it.
Yeah, and I say, it might not be for everyone, but it's I say, go over your work until you take the romanticism out of it. There is actually a science to how you've put sentences together, ideas on the page and all that sort of stuff. And you really need to kill that romanticism so you can look at it and go, I really love that bit I've written, but it's not serving the story. So I've got to cut it out. I always sort of say the writing serves one of three masters, which is the world building, the plotting, or the characterizations. And if it's not doing any of those, then it doesn't belong there. So with a lot of writers, the things you see are there's overwriting a lot of the times, where they want to make sure that you get an idea or get some premise that they're trying to put across. So they really overly explain it. They don't withhold any of the information, so there's not as much intrigue. A lot of inexperienced writers also love the big money scenes in their story, but not necessarily the journey to get there. So one example I always use is, let's say you're going to write a scene where someone comes home to tell their partner they've been cheating on them and they're going to leave them for the other person. And people go, well, that's a really juicy scene I could write. But I think, okay, show me the scene when they just arrive home and they're sitting in the car, and that moment before they go into the house to make this announcement. And that's really interesting psychology to me, is what's going through this person's head. So a lot of people love that big juicy scene, but not necessarily. So they don't do it the justice that it deserves. Sometimes it's you get the chronology is really not quite there, where they jump around a bit. I mean, writing takes a lot of discipline to stay in that moment, and obviously we're going to have brief digressions into backstory exposition and stuff, but we have to do it in the way that we're keeping readers engaged. Now, sometimes I've seen people write pages of exposition because they feel the reader can't go on unless they have all this information that I need to arm them with. So, you read this exposition, by the time you finish, it's like, I don't recall where we left the scene because I've just read pages of backstory about whatever the case is. So it's sort of like a real balancing act of keeping the pacing going, keeping the readers engaged, maintaining some intrigue as the narrative unfolds. And then sometimes it's just a case of, particularly with a lot of inexperienced stuff where they're not quite starting the story in the right place. Like I read it and I don't think we needed this first chapter. We could have probably started in the second chapter. It would have worked a lot better. But again, they were doing so much world building in terms of making sure the reader got where, they were coming from, that they felt they needed to waffle on with all this exposition. And it's like I said, it sometimes just maintain some intrigue and see that stuff in organically. Don't just put it in there because you need the reader to know this stuff. Find ways to seed it in organically rather than artificially, because you can always tell when the story starts talking at you rather than engaging you in a dialogue. And when it talks at you, you really begin to disengage.
I just wanted to go back to how you were talking about the money shot and how people want to write the money shot. I was reading an article on Substack about interiority of characters missing, about how sort of Netflix and the action movies that we're watching and the second screen thing is removing a lot of that story building and that characterization, and as a result it's kind of impacting on fiction a little bit too. And it made me a little bit sad because what we love the most as readers is the characterization and really living vicariously through the character and knowing what they're feeling and seeing what they're feeling and having the different experience to what we would have. So yeah, it sort of made me reflect on myself as a writer, and I'm like, well, that's something that I really do and I'm really interested in, and something that every book, because I'm working on a series now, I'm kind of focusing on. And so it's interesting that you're kind of confirming that through your experiences on the other side.
Netflix recently, there was an article how they'd instructed content makers to simplify plots because they had to accommodate audiences who were constantly on their phones. So they're just saying they're dumbing it down. And I've always sort of said, movies, for the most part, tend to speak to the dumbest person in the audience. They'll explain things, they'll make sure you get the point and all that, because they don't want audience members going, I don't get what that was about. But whereas books have always said speak to the smartest person in the audience, and they elevate you. If you are not quite getting it, you'll go have a discussion about whatever plot point, or you'll go look up a word that you didn't understand, whatever the case is. I just think contemporary filmmaking, particularly Hollywood filmmaking, as opposed to stuff that's coming from Europe or Asia, because a lot of stuff they do is great still. They're not really adhering to formulas in the same way. A lot of Hollywood filmmaking, particularly because we're now dominated by franchises and superhero characters and all that sort of stuff, they really it becomes very one-dimensional for the most part. You don't get those really great journeys with the characters. So you are simplifying stories and keeping them grounded on a really physical level rather than really getting behind the psychology of a character. You look at some things Christopher Nolan probably did it when he did the Batmans. He did his Batman trilogy, particularly the first two movies. He really explored the character psyche, which was really, it was interesting. And I think when you explore the way a character's mind works or their motivation or why they are who they are, it really opens up questions about not just them, but yourself, because you start to measure yourself up by that standard, or you start to explore your own life by that standard. And as you said, we live vicariously through characters. We always try to find some sort of relatability in any character who we read, and that's whether it's a good character or a bad character, because we all have our dark thoughts at times and stuff like that. So you might see a character that's an anti-hero, but you see parts of yourself in there. And that's a big part of what I think makes reading so compelling, is that you're getting inside the head of characters. You're getting inside their thought process and seeing them and understanding why they're making the decisions they're making. And as people, we're always sort of questioning, who are we? Why do we do what we do? So it's a constant search, and I think books do that regardless of what sort of genre it is, whether it's a literary fiction or whether it's a more action-oriented story. We're constantly sort of talking or exploring characters to see why they are who they are. And even in something and I'm not dismissing this because I really enjoy it, like Harry Potter is very much, even though it's a good versus evil story, you do really sort of get inside the heads of Harry and the other characters and understand the burdens that they're dealing with and how they're facing the pressure of combating great evil and becoming still who they are. And that's sort of stuff that we do every day, not combating great evil, but just facing who we are and trying to get to somewhere better and dealing with adversity.
Yes, I am battling my good and evil nature every day. I wanted to talk about some lessons from running a publishing house. Busybird Publishing is one of the ethical publishing companies, one of the two that I know in Australia. The other one is in Sydney. And because you support writers to publish, they pay you for their service, but they own the copyright, is their book, but they are getting the benefit of a publishing house and all of the things that you need to publish a book in terms of the cover, the formatting, the editing, etc. I just really wanted to, highlight that because it is a very admirable published.
Yeah, I mean, Blaise Van Heck, who founded Busybird, she used to explain if you're paying even just $1 for publishing, then you're self-publishing. And you should retain 100% of your rights and royalties, which is what we do. Now, there might be some legitimate reasons that they take a commission. So, for example, if a self-publisher had a shop front and they were selling your book for it, then understandably they would take a commission from the sale because it's going through their shop front. But generally, the writer should retain 100% of both rights and royalties. And there's too many examples of self-publishers or partnership publishers who take cut of royalties. They might even claim they're investing in the book's production with the author, but I doubt that actually happens at all. So they're actually getting a cut of something just in case it takes off, and they have the rights to it in case, it gets picked up for a movie or whatever the case. So one of the things that really surprised me when I came into the industry totally oblivious many years ago was how unscrupulous some of the industry is in the self-publishing space. You're dealing with a lot of inexperienced writers. So you get writers who are going to tertiary education, so they're actually learning more about writing and stuff like that, although I've been surprised that, because we get a lot of prospective interns, how little they're taught about publishing in these schools. So they don't really know the difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing. And a lot of these unscrupulous people will pose as traditional publishers, or they'll say they've got an innovative new model, which is like you chip in and we pay, and that way you get more royalties than the typical 7 to 10% you'd get from a traditional publisher. And naturally, an author's going to think, 50% instead of 10%, yeah, that sounds really cool. And they'll be told things that they can't be guaranteed, like, well, this is a great book, it's going to be a bestseller, you need to get it on the market. The market needs a book like this. You've got to get it out there. And again, inexperienced author, all us authors have ego. We love our egos to be stroked, that we've written something and it's worthwhile. So all this is happening in the background, and then you think, okay, I'll pay my $7,000, $8,000 to get published. And they're told you'll make the money back on sales and all that. And these are things that cannot be guaranteed. I always sort of say with publishing that one of the hardest things in any of the arts, and especially with books, is you can write beautifully and you can write a beautiful story. That doesn't guarantee it's going to sell. Plenty of great books that haven't sold a lot, and there's plenty of average books that have. And the reason for that is you have no control over what happens when it goes out into the world. You can do all the marketing in that, which you should, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to sell. And your book is also subject to external influences. So, for example, you might write a book about werewolves and release it, but 2 weeks earlier, another werewolf book came out, and that captured the market. Or you might write a book about a pandemic and then suddenly something hits and then you're living it and it's like, well, I don't want to read this stuff. So there's so many trends and tastes and all that, and they can just change very suddenly. So that's one of the hardest things to sort of understand about the publishing industry, one of the unfairest things, that like you have no control to what happens over the book once it goes out into the world. You can't force people to go buy it. And you have these misconceptions that like, if I get it in bookstores, it'll sell. That's like, have you been in the bookstore? Have you seen how many books are in the bookstore? Why is yours going to sell in big numbers? So, and that sort of goes back to what we were saying earlier. These are things you can't control. You can do everything right. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work. In any other industry, if you're doing well, if you're a great surgeon, you're a great landscaper, you're a great garbage collector, whatever the case, you'll probably move up the ranks. With writing, you're at the whim of so many things you can't control. And this is what frustrates me with self-publishers, is they're making promises that they cannot fulfill. They're telling authors you'll have a bestseller, you'll make the money all back. It's like, they might not. But these people are being convinced to wager their savings on something that they're being told is a certainty, which is actually not a certainty. And that's just really, I hate that. We get a lot of people coming through who have had they tell us horror stories of other places they've dealt with. And one of the differences of us, obviously, like I said, I've been writing for over 40 years. Kev Howlett, who's the boss there, he's been an illustrator photographer for as long. His wife Blaze, when she ran the business before she passed away unexpectedly, she was also a writer. So like I always say to authors, we're coming at it from where we're sitting in the chair that you're sitting. I always say we're a creative business run by creative people for creative people. So we treat you the way we'd expect to be treated. The positions are reversed. So that's one of the things that like really infuriates me when I see that there are writers who have been taken advantage of. And then you hear so many horror stories. You had that recent one in Ballarat, which is Shoreline last year, which went belly up and just left.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
They made me so angry. I saw them promoting on Facebook award nominee, and they were submitting the book. You know how if you're a member of Ally or of Small Network Press, there are certain awards that we can enter for free as part of our membership. And so they're putting these posts on Facebook like these people have been they've nominated them for these awards as if that means anything. Yeah. It means nothing.
And that's I know of people there who paid $13,000 and got nothing. We had clients who came to us who'd originally gone there and just lost thousands. And they were being told they had to wait like 18 months for their book to turn around, which again, self-publishing, if you're doing it, it should be a relatively quick turnaround. So there were so many things going wrong. Yeah. But this is the thing that infuriates me. Yeah, because you're dealing with really good people who love what they're doing. They're so excited, they've written the story and they want to see it out in the world and all that sort of stuff. And then the whole journey is just being tarnished because you're finding out that, well, hang on, I was part of something that wasn't quite above board. Like, I'm trying to choose my words carefully. So this is one thing, like, when we get people at Busybird, like, I have these long conversations, just explain, this is the industry, I try and just sort of say, hey, I hope you have a bestseller, but there's no guarantee that's going to happen. And I just don't want you walking out of here and coming back 6 months later going, oh, you're going to tell me, you told me my book was going to sell thousands and I've sold 7 copies. And it's like, well, why is that? It's because publishing and writing is just a really, really, really hard journey. As you said, you're working part-time. I'm still working pretty much full-time. I know writers who've won major awards who are still working, pretty much full-time, and that, particularly in Australia, which is such a small market. And that's not to say it can't happen, because it obviously has for people. But it's just a case of when you get these establishments who are just lying directly to authors. I know of another author, not Shoreline, this is a different place, who was just constantly he offered her like a deal, we can get you in this book fair, we can do this, and she ended up paying like $28,000 and didn't get a book at the end of it, and she had to go to litigation. And I know that this place, it doesn't even do edits of books. It just sort of goes, here's a sample edit of 1,500 words, go edit your book. And I'll give you an example too of how unethical some of these places are. One of the early books we edited, we weren't actually going to publish it, is I don't want to sort of talk about the subject matter, but like when I was reading it, I was like, this first chapter sounds so different to this second chapter. And then when I read it, I was like, this third chapter sounds like a different writer again entirely. And then what I did was I just grabbed a sentence and I stuck it in Google and I did a search, and it found for like one of the chapters, it was just a Wikipedia entry that the author had taken and rejigged a little bit, like it was a Year 9 English assignment, and they just juggled a few words around like, okay. And then that's what that author had done. They'd just actually drawn stuff from different places on the net and then just rejigged the word here or there. And we explained that you can't do this. And she said she didn't know because she came from an academic background and you could repurpose stuff. And like we just explained, this is not what you can do. And she went elsewhere to publish and they told her, this is a great book, you need to get out there on the market. So there was no quality control at all. There was no checks wherever she had copied stuff, plagiarized stuff. So you get these places who really, their bottom line is, we just want your money and we don't really care about the book we're going to help you put out. It's really just about us getting paid. And you look at some of these places in terms of what they're charging, it's like, and having worked in the business now, it's like, I don't understand why they're charging you so much, because outside of them paying their staff for like editing or design or whatever, they're making like, 100% markup on what they've charged you. So it's really, really annoying and, really infuriating.
When I was at the book fair a few weeks ago, and I did a panel where we were talking about, indie publishing and trad publishing, and someone came up to me afterwards and she's like, oh, I've been offered this contract and this publishing contract, and she started telling me things, and I said, sweetie, if you are paying someone, that's not an actual publisher. You know, a publisher pays you to take your rights and then they pay the cost of publishing. If you are paying them, then they are working for you and they are service provider for you.
Yeah.
And they should not be having any of your royalties. And she's like, oh, she's been getting quite pushy. And I said, yeah, check out Predator Beware, but that sounds like a very predatory individual. And thankfully this author had attended this fair and was actually going around and talking to people and listening to panels, and listening to people talking about industry. But so many people are just so desperate to have a book published, and we can relate, we've been there. And they just don't do their due diligence and they don't really understand the landscape at all.
I mean, in some fairness to the people who are doing it, it's getting published. A lot of the people they're dealing with are just really good talkers and will just really lead them down. You know,
yes.
Because you imagine with a lot of them, a lot of the authors, that is, they go into this trusting. They don't naturally go in as a skeptical and like, hey, was this, you know, why are you taking money? They think that's the model. Like I said, a lot of self-publishers I know are modelling themselves as traditional publishers, and the authors just don't know better. So when they're being told, oh, it's going to cost you $4 or $5 grand, and the author's going, oh, I have to pay, it's like, oh, well, that's part of the model. They don't know any better. And a lot of them just won't go do the due diligence. They won't go to, you know, look at a panel or go to Australian Society of Authors or Writers Victoria or whoever to ask these questions. So they're just sort of living in a vacuum, and that's why they're so easily misled, because they just don't know any better and they don't know who to speak to. And one of the bigger difficulties too is, you know, we see a lot of older writers, you know, you're talking about like retirees and people like that, who might be writing memoirs and stuff like that, but they are also not of an age where you get people like our generation and previously, internet's just part of our everyday lives. So you get people who jump on the internet and Google and stuff like that. You're also dealing sometimes with older generations who don't naturally, you know, go on Google and research how publishing models work and stuff like that. So they're really gullible in that way, and they just don't know any better. And again, they're just sold, you know, lies or guarantees that can't be made, and ultimately they just lose thousands, unfortunately.
Yeah, it really is very, very sad. But I'm really glad that we delved into that, because I'm really hoping that this can reach people and they can sort of understand a lot more and know where the ethical people are, like Busy Bird Publishing and Hembury Books, who are providing services. They don't keep any royalties, are building partnerships, building community, building support ecosystems to make sure that that journey is done the right way and, you know, the best chance of success.
I think the technology will be there for people just to self-publish themselves. Like, so if you know enough about the business, you can totally do it yourself. But most people don't. But I think the technology will come in where people will be able to just, it'll be a one-stop shop. You know, Word will be, here's the edits, here's the layout, here's the publish button. So it'll all be handled internally on the computer. You know, there's a software called Atticus, which is online word processor, but that saves and publishes as an ebook directly to Amazon. That's just bypassing all the self-publishers or author service providers. And as the technology advances, because AI, you know, I know a lot of people want to dismiss it, and this is not me advocating for it over using humans. Inevitably, I think it will be replacing humans, because as a people, that's what we do. We always replace people with technology. You know, it's happened for hundreds of years. So I think inevitably AI will start giving you those options to do that. And a lot of people will just be able to publish directly from their computer. I don't know how long that'll take, but like, I always try and look at where I think these things are going to go. And that's where I think that will start heading inevitably.
I've just today purchased AI translation course through Self-Publishing Formula. So, you know, that is one area that is really supporting writers to exploit their intellectual property. So before it would take thousands and thousands of dollars and time for someone to translate a book into another language. Now you can use AI to do the grunt work. You still need a human proofreader to actually check it and check the context and all of that. But it is making it more accessible. I'm actually working on my first book, my first translation into Bosnian, because I'm like, I can't really do another language until I translate a book into Bosnian. And so for that book, I'm using my husband as a proofreader to go through and to correct and to ensure that it is to standard. And I'm looking at other languages, and I've already got a German proofreader lined up. So that will be my first language. So, those things are wonderful because...
I was just say, I'd be really interested in how it does the translation too, because my background's Greek Macedonian. We spoke Macedonian at home. Translating the Macedonian directly into English, it doesn't always make sense because obviously there's different ways things are phrased in Macedonian, there's different sayings and all that. So I'd be curious how it actually does the translation, how much it understands the ins and outs of how language works. So I'd be really curious how that happens.
Well, you're actually supposed to create... I didn't do this, so my husband has had a lot more work. But what you're supposed to do is create files of like words that you don't want changed, rules in terms of the language and the words that you want used, and so give AI some parameters. And so I didn't do that. I was using Google Translate, which is not a great option.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even doing like the pronouns correctly. So I did then a short story where I saw how to do it, and I did then a short story with AI setting up these files and setting up these rules, and he read it and he was like, this is great, this is much better.
Yep.
So yeah, there is a process that you need to do. And then also this AI course that I've been looking at, so they're just showing you how to do the translation. You still need to use the models and whatever. It's also about how to translate the blurbs. It's about how to find keywords in different languages, how to do marketing in the different languages. Even today I saw in a Facebook group about in Germany, they have specific rules where you can't have a title that is the same as any other title.
Okay.
That your imprint page needs to have your publisher details, address details, a website, or you get like emails that you're breaking copyright. So, there's all these things that you need to know about when you're publishing internationally so that you don't inadvertently break the rules that exist in that country of origin. So it's fascinating. That's why I'm doing the course, because self-publishing formula are really wonderful in terms of supporting authors and developing courses to take you through it. And then anytime anything changes, they update those courses. So once you have them, you have lifetime access. And the best thing is monthly fee, monthly repayment plan. So you can afford it. You take 12 months to pay it off.
That's cool. I always point at like audiobooks too. Like right now, if you want to do an audiobook, you have to hire a studio, get a narrator, get a sound engineer, cut it all together. And AI will ultimately just do that. So it's like, do I pay $6,000 to do it in the studio, or do I just get AI to do it for me in 3 minutes for a fraction of the cost? I mean, AI already does it. Google Play Books already does audiobook conversions. All it needs is the ebook, and it just basically translate that directly to audio, and it lets you choose from the voices. The voices are modelled on real people, so they sound okay. I haven't done this for a few years, so it might have changed completely, but when I tried it originally, it just didn't have the range to read a novel where you need it to go a bit more emotional or a bit more intense. I've heard from someone else who's in the film industry, he was using another one, he's saying it is getting to the point you can direct it and just tell it, do this, be angrier, be whatever the case is. The AI will learn too. AI will just actually go, hey, I can now get the context and tone of what I'm reading. I know this is meant to be a dramatic moment. I need to read it dramatically. So again, this is not to advocate for AI. Like, this is what I always say is, totally would endorse humans over AI, but it's coming anyway. So it's like, well, how do you get in front of it, and how do you make it work for you? I'd never endorse it to write you a book from scratch or like that, but as a tool that you can use to complement.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, so it's going to be invaluable in those ways, but unfortunately it is probably going to cause a lot of redundancies in, things like designers and editors. I mean, if you look at the AIs that are doing animation, it's really, really scary, for animators. I don't know what's going to happen to the industry, because AI is just doing that so well already. And again, here's the other thing, to always say, we're not seeing the end of the technology here. We're only seeing the beginning of it. So where it goes in the next 5 years,
yes,
before it potentially enslaves humanity or does something like that, it's really going to be a powerful tool to use in so many different ways, as long as they do control it. Now, whether they can or can't, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of warnings coming out about what it's doing, and I heard Elon Musk talking about it once, saying there's a 20% chance it could go wrong, and it's like, that's not a small figure. That's like 1 in 5 that things could go wrong. But in terms of this is where I go back to, just to say, for someone who wants to self-publish, if they know a little bit, they could use AI to do the editing, to do the layout, to do the cover design, and to do the administration. And ultimately, you'll be, your laptop, your computer is going to be your publisher too. So people are going to get more and more opportunity to publish their work.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably going to impact small press publishing too. And you'll get a lot more people doing it for themselves.
I think it will.
And what I mean,
Having said that, I honestly have come to the point of view that the only way to make a viable living as an author these days is as an indie author. That the traditional publishing industry is really not supportive of writers, especially in Australia, and it does not give you the opportunity to sort of make a wage. And so my point of view, and that's what I'm seeing play out in terms of the income that I'm getting and the income that I'm building as an indie author, that is the possibility of having a more viable source of income and achieving a little bit more financial freedom.
Yeah, I should just qualify. When I said small press publishing, I meant traditional small press publishing will struggle a lot more trying to get authors when authors can just do it themselves. And I always say to authors, look, if you plan to be a career author and write multiple books and you're going to self-publish, then treat the self-publishing arm like a micropress that's separate from you. So you're the author and that's the micropress. So come up with a name, come up with a brand, go get the ISBNs under that name. If you can, get a website, and you then have a publishing signature online that's separate to you as an author. And I mean, there's still some stigmatization around self-publishing, so it also gives you separation in that regard. And I think a lot of people, I know more and more people who aspire to become traditional authors. Myself, I've been traditionally published 4 times, but now I'm starting to do my own books too, because I know enough to do them all, and I know the reality of traditional publishing is it's very risk averse, because they obviously want to make money. So there's a lot of good stories that just don't get published, and there's plenty of examples of stories that have been passed over repeatedly and then picked up somewhere down the line and then become a big hit. And that's Harry Potter's always the best example of that. And on the flip side, there's a lot of books that they've backed and haven't gone anywhere. So I think a lot more authors are going to just say, I'm going to do it for myself. I'm going to have full control over it, and I'm sure it's going to be careful how I say. In terms of some of my marketing previously, it wasn't exactly the sort of marketing I would have done. And in retrospect, because I was working in the industry and I was getting published, I was like, I'm going to be hands off because I don't want to be the nosy author who's constantly saying, do this, do that. But now in retrospect, I think I should have actually done that because I sort of had strong ideas about the way they should have taken it. And what they did wasn't incompetence or anything. It was just decisions they made that they thought were going to work. And that's what every publisher's always doing. They're making decisions based on what they know. But that doesn't actually guarantee that they're going to succeed. I mean, traditional publishers publish a swath of authors, and not all of them are, selling tons of books. A lot of them aren't. It's just that the few that are selling books are selling lots. So they're always making decisions based on, their knowledge of the market. I always say, they're making educated guesses, but they're still guesses. I think with self-publishing, indie publishing, I think a lot more people are going to go, you know what, I know exactly how I want to do this. That doesn't mean it's going to work. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work. But it does mean that at least I can feel satisfied that I tried things the way I wanted to do them. If they didn't work, well, I have no complaints to say, well, I should have done it this way. So I think indie publishing is really empowering authors to just go out and do it on their own. And you're seeing more and more. Whereas I'd say, 15, 16, 20 years ago, you probably had only people self-publishing who really didn't understand the market as well. And now you're getting more and more people who are aspiring to become professional authors who potentially have been traditionally published, like yourself, myself, who are just saying, I want to control the journey now. I'm just going to do it myself, and I know enough to do it, or I know enough people who can help me do the aspects I can't do, like cover design or whatever it is. And I'm just going to live and die by my own sword. You'd have people who want that.
And you build your ecosystem. I've got a proofreader, and now I'm having proofreaders in the different languages. I've done audiobooks. I've worked with narrators. I have my, regular narrators that I was using, and if I do any further books, I'll be using. And what you're talking about, that's exactly what I did. I established myself as a micro press. I gave myself a name, registered as a small business, tied it to my ABN, and really built the foundation in terms of what is it that I'm wanting to do as a press, so that I am taking it seriously. I am approaching it in a very, very professional way and setting the standard. And what I'm loving is just the opportunities to exploit my intellectual property, to take advantage of all the energy that is happening in the indie world and the new innovations to try.
And with your translations, you're thinking globally, which is also great. Like I always tell our authors, don't think nationally. We live in a digital world. You can think internationally now. You don't have to be in the US to do an interview. You can just do it through, some sort of online medium like Zoom or whatever the case is, or Riverside. So think internationally, because your reach can go anywhere nowadays. You don't have to geographically be in that location. You can seek reviewers anywhere across the world. You can seek interviews and that sort of thing. So don't think microscopically. And particularly with Australia, I'm not bagging Australia because our publishing is small, but it is small and it's impoverished, unfortunately, because governments always tend to cut arts funding. I mean, look at what the Victorian state government's doing to Writers Victoria, which is horrible. So it's been a success in Australia doesn't, I mean, even being a success in Victoria doesn't necessarily going to be a success in a different state, because we are so spread and all that sort of stuff. Things that are a success here in Australia don't always, go overseas. Whereas things that are big in the US and the UK tend to splash back here. It's like, think internationally. And I always sort of say, look, obviously you've got to keep perspective and don't go quit your day job just yet. Don't buy that Porsche overnight for you. It might take time, but it is part of the journey. The people who do have the overnight success, like I said, they're rare. And then you get the people, so I should look this up, but there's some actor, I'm thinking of Samuel L. Jackson, but it might not have been, but he said it took me 20 years to become an overnight success. And it's that sort of thing, like when you break through, everyone's like, oh, where'd this person come from? And then you look and you go, oh, geez, they've been around for ages doing work that I just never noticed, but it just built and built and built until they broke through. That's the same thing with writing, totally.
Well, that's the thing. I was traditionally published in Australia only. They bought all of my rights and didn't exploit them. I got the rights back to my all of my backlist and started publishing. Like, I get royalties from sales in Germany, in the UK, in the US.
And the thing too is, traditional publishers too. If you're not having that skyrocket success, then they're just moving to the next author in their queue. You have your time in the sun, and if you're not having continued success, then they have to move on to the next author and give them their focus, and that just goes on. I published a book 5 years ago. I can still push this. I can still do posts on social media, or still try and get reviews for it, or whatever the case. So that's one of the beauties of being in control of your own journey. It really just means you work to your own timetable, but you also give yourself the love that you might not get long term from a traditional publisher. And that's not to besmirch traditional publishing. It's just to sort of say that you have to understand the reality. So it's a really difficult industry. It's saturated. So it's like you can get lost in the crowd when you are a traditional publisher if you're not that one. If you're not and I'm not saying this with any malice again, like if you're not the Trent Dalton who's just taking off and getting a lot of exposure and stuff like that, a lot of times you just get lost in the crowd. I know really, really good authors who just don't get published or whose books have just disappeared. So being in charge of your...
It's just that now every time I publish a new book, that's another opportunity for authors to find me and to find my books. And I don't stop promoting. I am constantly promoting my books. Whereas, as you said, a publisher does move on. They have other books that they need to promote, and, everyone takes their turn. I've really enjoyed...
I'll just say really quickly, too, as an indie author, you're meant to be more with your writing. With traditional publishers, they tend to be very myopic in terms of, what is this book? Is it a horror? Is it a sci-fi? Whatever it is. Like I always say to our interns, if you cannot see where your book would sit on the shelf in the bookstore, there's a very good chance the publisher won't take it on, traditional publisher, because they won't know how to market it. It's a little bit of a horror, it's a little bit of a romance, it's a little bit of a science fiction novel. They want to be able to say, it's a horror novel. This is what we're pushing it. But as an indie author, you can do what you want, and you have a lot more license to do if you're writing at times.
For us, as indie authors, we never stop fighting for that book, and you have that more perspective. Well, I want to really thank you, Les, for coming on and for having this really great conversation about the industry that I'm hoping will support writers, especially emerging writers, in understanding, the industry. And I just also wanted to ask, is there anything that you're working on at the moment that you wanted to talk about?
I'm going through a revision of some of my old books, funnily, but because you talked about sort of putting stuff away for a little bit and coming back to it and that. So there's stuff I've just had sitting there for ages, which I'm just gradually revising. I'm actually going to do a re-release of my novel August Falling, which was originally published in 2018 with Pantera, and I've sort of given it like a director's cut. Like I've gone back and done things which are a bit more different to the commercial release. I'm trying to start this blog. I'm just trying to find the time at the moment, like a creative blog about. I want to tell this story, but it's all told through journal entries about a guy who can't sleep. So in my life, I've had like a lot of sleep issues. And so every entry begins with him in bed and just sort of exploring why he can't sleep and stuff like that. Because when you can't sleep, you start to think some pretty murky things in the darkness. And I was thinking, it'd be curious if I could tell a story just directly from never leaving that bed. And it's just what's happening around him as he tries to get to sleep. So I'm just not sure whether I'll do it on my website or on Substack or whether I'll just do both.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you're doing. And also, anyone interested in writing, please follow Les on social media. You are very generous in sharing lessons, sharing things that you are coming across, things that you're learning, things that writers need to know about. So follow him in social media to get access to all that amazing knowledge.
Cool. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for tuning in to Amra's Armchair Anecdotes. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and follow for more insight, stories and inspiration. From my armchair to yours, remember, every story begins with a single word.